Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are having a very interesting session today on the Croom Airport or the Columbia Air Center and an exhibit that's being shown, I believe, at the College Park Airport. College Park Airport's one of the oldest in the world or in continuous operation. It is where the Wright brothers did some of their flying. And what I want to say is that about the Columbia Airport Center, it was the first African American airport in Maryland. It was started by 4 African American pilots from Howard University in 1941 because, of course, it was segregation time and they didn't have access to other airports. We're really pleased to have Nadine Baxmati Fatou, and who is the head of the College Park Aviation Museum, and Luke Perez, who is the project lead for this Columbia Airport Air Center exhibit. And this is one of Corridor Conversations meetings, which we started Hyattsville Aging in Place, Helping Hands University Park, Neighbors Helping Neighbors College Park, and Explorations on Aging College Park. We started this during the pandemic because we couldn't get together in person. Now we can, but we've decided this is a good way to get people together and to be able to host a number of creative people that are along the Route 1 corridor. So we will continue doing it. I want to go ahead and introduce now, I think Dr. Baxmati Fatou is going to start out, and then we'll have Luke, who will tell us more about the exhibit. So Dr. Fatou, there you are.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us today, and thank you for all those who have joined us on such a beautiful Saturday afternoon. So we thank you for that. My name is Nadine Baxmati Fatou. I'm the director of the College Park Aviation Museum. I started in this role in September 2023. And I'm very privileged to have joined the museum at the time during the development phase of the Columbia Air Center exhibition and be involved in this process. For those of you who don't know, the College Park Aviation Museum is owned and operated by MNCPPC, the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. We are Smithsonian affiliates. And the museum is located on, as Lisa has said, on the grounds of the world's oldest continuously operating airport. It was founded in 1909, and we're the only historic institution in the DC metro area that is completely dedicated to local aviation history. Our mission as a museum is, of course, to document and preserve this history, but mostly also to interpret it meaningfully. So in the past few years, the museum has revised its practice to reflect its diverse collections and community, and has committed to redress past white and male-dominant narratives and shift its focus to center on underrepresented communities and unrecognized local histories and stories. And one of those largely forgotten histories is actually that of the Columbia Air Center airfield. Columbia Air Center airfield is the nation's first licensed Black-owned and operated airport. It's located 25 miles from DC in Croom, Maryland, and operated from 1940 to 1962. Today, the land is owned by MNCPPC. It's part of the Patuxent River Park, so you can visit. There isn't much to see there, unfortunately, apart from, a few interpretive signs that stand there. But it's in a public open space. Since 2022, the museum has worked closely with the only known member of the Columbia Air Center community and 4 descendant families to preserve and share this history before knowledge is lost. So the development of the permanent exhibition, Columbia Air Center Determined to Fly, which is scheduled to open actually, hopefully in the fall of 2025. Now we're towards the end. We have completed the design phase and we're into fabrication phase. So hopefully, if it will open in the fall, the date will come later. So the exhibition will recognize the legacy of the Columbia Air Center community and will center on the community. This exhibition is a partnership. So although the museum developed the narrative, developed the exhibition, this was done in consultation with the families, with the community members. So the project voices the stories and experience of CAC or Columbia Air Center community as shared by the descendant themselves and in consultation with them. So this is a new approach to exhibition development as well. The exhibition will be our first permanent exhibition for a while, and most importantly, the first permanent exhibit dedicated to Black aviation history. This is very significant because African American have been historically absent or overlooked in both the aviation and museum fields. So this exhibition is, I would say, is only the beginning. And we're hoping that it will help grow the interpretation of Columbia Air Center, connect more deeply with the community, and hopefully also foster a meaningful space for conversation. As a museum, we're very honored to have become the repository of this history. But on a personal level, though I've been developing exhibition for over 10 years overseas now, it's very humbling and inspiring to be involved in such a groundbreaking project, meet some of the descendants, hear their stories, and work with an amazing and committed team led by our curator, Luke Perez, who has ushered this project from the very beginning and now is the expert on the subject. So I'll leave the floor to Luke because he has so many interesting things to say, way more than me. Luke, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Hi, everyone. My name is Luke Perez. I'm the curator of collections at the College Park Aviation Museum. I've been there for about 3.5 years. And I have basically been working on some form of this project since I started in my position there. My background is in U.S. 19th and 20th century history and in collections care. So we'll be talking about Columbia Air Center Determined to Fly. So to begin with, what is Columbia Air Center? It's located in Crewe, Maryland, and it was an airport that operated from 1940 to 1962. It's the DC area is an overlooked, forgotten, historic Black-owned and operated airport. And to clarify, that means the airport business organization was Black-owned. The land itself was leased. It was the first licensed Black-owned airport in the U.S. The first Black-owned airport in the U.S. was Robins Airport. It opened in 1933 outside of Chicago, Illinois, but it only operated for 6 months. A storm destroyed it within the first 6 months, and a local white-owned airport, the owner of Harlem Airport, invited them to fly in a segregate fashion, but invited them to fly to their own airport. With that context, I consider this to be the first successful Black-owned airport in the U.S. And to give a brief timeline of Columbia Air Center, there's a brief map here of how far away it is. It's 26 miles southeast of the U.S. Capitol building. It opened as Riverside Airfield in the fall of 1940. It was operated by the Cloud Club, which operated Howard University's civilian pilot training program, which was one of only 8 in the nation. 1942, December 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, it closed for the duration of World War II. It was used by the Naval Support Facility at Anacostia for practice during World War II, but it opened at the end of 1944 by John Green and financier Dr. Coleridge M. Gill under the new name of Columbia Air Center. Then in 1954, John Green retires, and it goes through a few, the next 8 years or so is changing operation, first by partnership under the name of W&J Flying Services. That operates for 2 years. One of the owners leaves, and then the remaining partners form a new partnership known as the Capital Flying Club, led by Charles Wren. The airport kind of goes under different names, such as Croom Airport, Croom Station, or Columbia Airport, or Columbia Air Center. 1962, the landowner Rebecca Fisher dies. Her heirs refuse to lease to African Americans, so the airport closes and the land is sold to MNC PPC. And to begin with, I will use the term Columbia Air Center to refer to this entire history, even though at different periods it does go by different names. But just for convenience sake, I will use Columbia Air Center to refer to this entire history. Almost all this information is based off the collections that we have, which come from 5 to 6 families and people, archival research, a lot of newspaper research, some research in archives at the National Archives and at the Smithsonian, but there is still a lot of work and research that needs to be done. And then this is meant to be a brief introductory history. There are more personal histories in here that could take a whole nother lecture. So to lay the groundwork, I'll first talk about black aviation in the 1920s and 1930s was the national scene when Columbia Air Center emerged. As we all know, segregation and racism was rampant. There were no laws that forbade Black Americans from learning to fly, but culturally, there were major obstacles. Betsy Coleman was the first famous African American aviator. She had to go to France to earn her license in 1921. In the late 1920s, 1930s, Chicago and Los Angeles were the
Can you
two
make
hubs.
that bigger? 'Cause it's,
Yeah, let me see.
thank you.
Okay. So,
Better.
okay.
Good.
So, black aviation in the 1920s, Bessie Coleman was the first famous black African-American aviator. She had to go to France to earn her pilot's license. Chicago and Los Angeles were the hubs of black aviation during the late 1920s and 1930s. The first licensed black pilot, I believe, was 1927. But even by 1935, there were only 47 licensed black pilots. Though with Chicago and Los Angeles being hubs, there were flight club and flight groups. Not all members would necessarily have earned licenses, but this is, a minuscule number of licensed black pilots compared to the whole population of licensed pilots. I wish I had a number. I believe off the top of my head, though, I think it was like around 100,000.
Wow.
And of course, flying was a very elite hobby, and it still is. So for black pilots, flying definitely transgressed Jim Crow racial perceptions, and it was not just taboo for a black person to fly, but it was very taboo for white people to teach black African Americans to fly. Now moving to DC specifically, the birth of DC's black aviation community, we have very little information. I actually just kind of uncovered this within the last few months, but it may have started as early as 1933. There's this list of licensed black aviators from, I believe, a 1936 Who's Who, and there are two mentioned, I pointed them out, who live in the DC area. Jesse McCoy Hansen appears to have been the first black aviator in the DMV. I found him in newspapers. In 1932, he was mentioned as the head of the Colored Junior Air Legion, which met the YMCA and made airplane models, but he really doesn't show up that much elsewhere. R. Grayson McGuire, there's absolutely no information about him. But there is a brief mention of Hansen trying to open up an airport in Forestville, Maryland. There's some notices of him scheduling to open up his airport, but it's really never mentioned again. Then a gentleman called Charles Alfred Anderson tries opening the Arlington Aviation Field in 1938, but that lasted less than 6 months. Here's a map of the DC area airports circa 1940s. College Park Airport. The College Park Airport and this Maryland area had quite a number of airports. DC, of course, itself only has the 2 military airports, Bowling Field, and then there's Hoover Field, and then Hoover Field will close, and then the Washington National Airport will open up. And then just to get a sense, this is the DC's Black population taken from racial covenants in DC in 1940. So a map of the map of that. And then the 1930s, this is the list of airfields where Black pilots could fly. Very few in Maryland. Hanson's Airport was the only one that I mentioned. This is the only one in Maryland at the time. The rest were really Beacon Field and Hybla Valley Airport. I'll get to those in a bit. Arlington Aviation Field was an attempt to open up a Black open airport. And Buzzards Point is just really, there was a person who had a seaplane who was teaching off the river, so you didn't need an airport to teach off the river. Pioneer aviator Charles Alfred Anderson moved to the DC area in 1938. He partners with a businessman, a garage owner named Noble D. Butler, and they start a flying school together. We're not sure if Anderson has to make his own airfield because he isn't allowed to fly elsewhere, or if he's trying to do this as an opportunity. We don't know that. This is one of the first advertisements we found in the newspaper from September 9th, 1938. The school is on the board of the Fairfax County and Alexandria. It's integrated. Anderson teaches both white and Black students. It lasts only 6 months. They have to apply for a license through the state of Virginia. There's a lot of public outcry there being a Black-owned airport. They try to get the state of Virginia to deny them. Surprisingly, the state of Virginia grants them the preliminary license, but then the landowner ends their lease, so they have to close the airport. So after the announcement that they were given a temporary permit in November of 1938, this airport is never mentioned again. And that's Arlington Aviation Field here. So then Anderson teaches out of Buzzards Point. It doesn't seem, I can't get a sense of where he's teaching when, but he teaches out of Buzzards Point and then Beacon Field and Hybla Valley, which are both south of Alexandria. Now, to actually talk about Charles Alfred Anderson, who was born in 1907, lived in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania in his early 20s. He wanted to learn how to fly. The local flying club wouldn't teach him. So with the help of his community, he purchased an airplane. But they still wouldn't teach him, even though they would let him to rent a hangar and space at the airfield. He would really just taxi around the airfield. He was, of course, didn't want to get up and fly because he didn't know how to land. There was one white pilot who didn't own an airplane who wanted to visit someone, either his mother or his girlfriend in New Jersey, so he wanted to fly on weekends somewhat regularly. Charles Anderson made a deal with him. He would let him use the airplane if he would be able to stay as a passenger and watch him how to fly. Eventually, Anderson befriends a German immigrant who owns an airport. He called himself the Flying Dutchman, and he teaches him how to fly. And actually, he really encourages Anderson to apply for not just a license, but an air transport pilot's license, which is the highest license pilot can get. But then once he earned his pilot's license, Anderson's white employer fired him, saying, "Let your license take care of you." He ends up finding a partner. He bounces back. They go on some big publicity flights throughout the U.S. and into the Caribbean. Famous aviator Charles Lindbergh has his airplane named the Spirit of St. Louis. They named their airplane the Spirit of Booker T. Washington. Then around 1938, he moves to Washington, D.C. to open up a flight school. Here are some newspaper clippings of it. The one on the very left I mentioned before, there's a brief mention of Jesse McCoy trying to open up a high school. This is the only ever mention of that. It never shows up again. And then this is the other articles are about Anderson trying to open up his airfield. And these are from Washington Afro-American. And interestingly, it was actually the manager of the local white airports that Anderson ended up having to fly at afterwards, testified on behalf of Anderson because he wanted there to be a Black-owned airport so African Americans wouldn't have to fly out of his own airport. As I said, the landlord ends up cutting their lease, so this airport is not exist. A group of his students formed something called the Cloud Club. It's first mentioned in the July 1939 social column in the newspaper. That's in the bottom left. It really is just a mention of these individuals formed an aviation club and will jointly buy a plane. We get a good amount of information from this newspaper social column called the Capital Spotlight, but it is very brief, usually like this, just a few sentences at most a paragraph. They don't go by the name of Cloud Club until the 1940, but then they incorporate in Washington, D.C. You can see their logo, and they're mostly comprised of business or well-to-do class, and they're mostly men of the late 20s to early 30s. They flew out of Hybla and Beacon airports before going to Riverside. So that's, as you see, all the way down here, and most of them, of course, lived in central D.C. Members include John R. Pinkett Jr. He was 25 years old when he joined. He was the son of John Pinkett Sr., the owner of the city's first black real estate and insurance firm. Then there's Henry or Link Johnson Jr., 35 years old. He was the son of two icons. His father was Henry Lincoln Johnson Sr. He's a leading black Republican lawyer and politician, member of President William Howard Taft's Black Cabinet, and was DC's 8th black recorder of deeds. And the first black recorder of deeds was Frederick Douglass. So this is a great honor for his father. And then his mother was a Harlem Renaissance poet. So this is really, as social elite as you can. These are the sons and daughters of famous people. So these are members of the Cloud Club. Moving briefly to the civilian pilot training program. This began in 1938. This was the first government-sponsored flight program. So before this, the only way you could learn how to fly was either joining the military and joining the very small Air Force, going to flight school, or going to a flight club. You really had to have the money to do this, but in preparation for World War II, the U.S. government starts the civilian pilot training program, and students can learn how to fly for $40. It's a huge entryway to aviation for so many people, especially for African Americans and for women. Right here, there were only 4,000 pilots in the military in 1939. So they were really planning on using this program to increase the number of pilots in expectation that the U.S. would join them. But out of 2,600 programs, only 7 to 8 black programs were allowed. Howard University was one such program. And the first program was taught by Charles Anderson. Anderson taught out of Hybla Valley. They would do ground school and theory at Howard University during the week, and they would go to flying lessons at Hybla Valley on the weekend. It cost students around $40. And so Anderson, to go over again, moves to the DC area in 1938. He starts teaching the Cloud Club. He teaches at Howard University civilian pilot training program. But basically the next year, Tuskegee Institute poaches him, and he goes to Tuskegee, and he will end up becoming known as the father of the Tuskegee Airmen. And it's at this same time, he leaves in July of 1940, tensions seem to boil over immediately. It's unclear of whether Anderson kept the relations harmonious or if this was just bound to happen. But as the Washington Afro-American, one of the reporters writes here, the manager considered himself the great liberator for previously tolerating a pioneer colored flying club, hired a colored instructor, and shunting all the dark faces to an isolated corner. Basically, when too many dark faces showed, they started getting unhappy with the fact that they allowed black pilots to even fly there. So they're kicked out of Hybla Valley Airport. They go to Beacon Airport, which is really just down the street, but tensions are there are just as bad. And so willingly, well, not willingly, but the Cloud Club decides they're not going to put up with this, so they decide around October 1940 that they would have better luck finding their own airport. At first, they're trying to just find another airport to fly out of. They don't necessarily have the intention of establishing their own airport. They were actually about to sign an agreement with a airport that was about to open to fly there when someone recommended, hey, there's this large area of unused farmland that could be good for flying. A lot of the members didn't actually want to even look at this because they thought they had an agreement signed with this other airport. But when they show up, they fall in love with the space. The majority of us agreed that this was utopia. Others bitterly complained that the distance from Washington was too great and forevermore would have nothing to do with the activities of the Cloud Club. As you can see, it is extremely far away. Beacon and Hybla Valley Field were already far. They're about 16 miles from DC. Riverside was much further away. But it was their own space. So the land was owned by a woman named Rebecca Fisher who lived on the Eastern Shore. We know almost nothing about her other than that she was, I believe the land belonged to her late husband and she was unable to sell it when she was alive. She rented the land for $50 a month, and during the entire existence of this airfield, that rent never changed, which is incredible to think about. It opened in the winter of 1940. We don't have a specific date, but we know that it opened up in the winter because they complained once they signed the lease and created the runways that they were flying in the bitter cold, that they would have a can for a fire, and they would have to huddle around it while taking turns flying the airplane. Right away, Anderson had left in 1940. There was no Howard Civilian Pilot Training Program lesson in the fall because they didn't have an airport, and they begin again in January of 1941. This time the Cloud Club has the contract, and that's actually how they earned the airport license, become the first licensed Black-owned and operated airport. They held air shows for the public. They were extremely popular, but most of the club members were hobby aviators, and this was becoming a successful airfield. They realized maybe they were in a bit over their head, but they had one member who was a bit of a veteran pilot by the name of John Green. He was new to the area. He had been in DC only since summer of 1940, and they asked him to manage. Here's a picture of John Green. And the next name is Jimmy Lunceford. Some of you might recognize the name. Jimmy Lunceford was a big band jazz musician. He was the leader of a big band, and he had always wanted to fly. We don't know exactly how he learned about the Cloud Club. Some of the members of the Cloud Club owned jazz clubs on U Street, so we think that that might have been a connection. But he joined the Cloud Club right away. He became their director of publicity, and he even had some of his band members help build the airport, and he helped raise to open up the airport. Here's an aerial view of the airfield in 1943. And this is actually taken from Google Maps. This is what the area looks like today. And it's fun. I just only noticed this yesterday. You can see a bit of the remains of the airfield. This circle, or this circle, that circle. So John Green was asked to become the manager of the airport. John Green himself is an overlooked pioneer. He was born in Georgia in 1900. He attended the Hampton Institute to earn a mechanics degree. He never finished it. When his mother died, he moved to Boston to be close to his father. But while he was at Hampton Institute, he had his first close experience with airplanes, and he wanted to become an aviation mechanic. He goes to Boston. He goes to the airport. He just watches the plane flies. He sees that one of the pilots is taking on tourists. Eventually works up the nerve to ask that pilot, who's a white pilot, if he would be willing to take him on a flight. And that pilot ended up being very friendly. His name was also Green. I believe it was Walter Green. They kind of strike up a friendship, and Walter Green asks him if he wants to learn how to fly. He learns how to fly, we think, in the early 1920s, but he does not apply for a license until the late 1920s or early 1930s. But he is hired. This is his part of his resume at the lower left. He is hired by an aircraft company called E.W. Wiggins Airways, and through that he becomes the first licensed black airplane mechanic. And then he also becomes the second black pilot to earn an air transport license, just right behind Charles Anderson, who I had mentioned earlier. He seems to be very interested in education. We have a lot of anecdotal stories of his time there, but not a lot besides that. We know that he tried teaching in aviation school or an aviation class. That's kind of fuzzy. And he was a noted parachute jumper. And then in 1940, he was asked to join the civilian pilot training program at Chicago's Coffey School of Aeronautics. which was I believe, the only black flight school in the country at that time. It was a major honor. We have letters from Willa Brown to him. We don't have him straight out denying it, but he obviously does not become an instructor there because he moves to DC in 1940. We do have letters of the DC Vocational Schools was trying to start their first aeronautics program, but they couldn't find anyone to lead the program. And there was a chief editor of one of the black newspapers in the area reached out to John Green. He didn't know him before. He said, "Look, we're offering you this job, and if you don't take it, there will probably have to be a white instructor if they even continue with this program if you don't take it." And he moves to DC in the summer of 1940. Here are clippings of his own licenses that he kept in scrapbook. These are on loan to the museum. Let's see, that's his flight instructor license on the top right, his mechanic's license in the bottom right here. It's frustrating they don't have the date it was issued, but they have the expiration date in 1933. We have this commercial pilot's license from Boston. Yeah. He's offered the position of becoming airport manager in November 1941, and December 1942, the airport closes. The airport closes after the attack on Pearl Harbor. They stop most civilian flying on the eastern seaboard, and in the DC area that actually goes on for longer. There are a few materials from the Navy. So the Navy commandeers the airfield partway through. They start using for practice, and this is one of the documents from there. It gives you the numbers of how large it was. They had built it, and at some point, the Navy does award the Cloud Club some damages for lost revenue. I believe they give them about $5,000 in compensation. So Columbia Center is all the way here. Bowling and Anacostia are where they are, and then Camp Springs is in between. Camp Springs because of Andrews Air Force Base. John Green, since he's on the older side when the war breaks out, he is actually, I believe, voluntarily enlists to be an aircraft mechanic at Camp Springs. During this period, the Cloud Club seems to just quietly disband. They spread throughout the nation and the world. One of the members, John R. Pinkett, who I mentioned before, actually goes down to Tuskegee to become a civilian instructor alongside Charles Anderson for the Tuskegee Airmen. And because John Green is around in the area, he seems to be aware of what's happening with the space that was Riverside Airport. And he is in contact, and the Navy notifies him that they stopped using it by mid to late 1944. So then he requests that the Navy return the airfield to him, and he applies for to reopen as an airport. He gets his official airport license in December of 1944. And he's financed by Dr. Coleridge M. Gill. The Navy actually improves the airport. It goes from 4 runways to 8 runways, and they improve the grading of the runways on the airfield. The left is the temporary license of this airport, and the right is the first official license. Dr. Gill was Columbia Air Center's major financier. He was a New England native. He moved to the DC area to attend medical school at Howard, and he received his degree in 1938. He had always wanted to be a pilot, and he had tried enlisting the Tuskegee Airmen, but he was a married man with a child on the way and a doctor. He was turned down. We aren't clear how he knows John Green, but he's friends with John Green, who also lived in the Boston area for a long time, so they might have bonded over that or known each other while they were in Boston. It's unclear, but it seems that Coleridge Gill ends up learning how to fly through John Green, and he's just passionate about that. So much so that he becomes the major financier for Columbia Air Center. We have a list of aircraft at some point. There are, I believe, 12 aircraft, and he personally owns 7 of them. And, these weren't aircraft he just used. These were aircraft that he provided for Columbia Air Center. This is a 1947 photo of the airfield at the time. So this smaller hangar on the left was the hangar that they first built when they built the airport in 1941. And then this is a larger hangar that they built with funds provided by Dr. Gill. You can see how the runway is much nicer than the runway in this photo. it's a little harder to tell, but this is nice, nice, smoother, properly graded runways. Columbia Air Center, John Green names it an air center to emphasize the use of the space as a center for more than just flying. He also wanted to be a social and educational space. Like I said, he's the head of the DC Vocational School's aeronautics program, so he's an educator at heart. And Green does a lot while he's manager of the airport. He starts the first all-black Civil Air Patrol squadron called Columbia Squadron in 1946, 1947, and soon two more open up after that. One was named Syphax Squadron. I can't remember the name of the third. And he was, yeah, like I said, still teaching the aeronautics program. And the school was integrated. This is a photo taken from a newspaper photographer showing 3 high school students at Columbia Air Center. As I said, it seems that none of the Cloud Club members seem to have returned, but it's not clear. We don't necessarily have rosters of either the Cloud Club members or of the Columbia Air Center. Many members of the Columbia Air Center were former military and were involved in the Civil Air Patrol. On the left is an advertisement in the Howard University student newspaper, and a major component of having a Civil Air Patrol squadron at Columbia Air Center was that they had cadet programs. So this, with Green teaching at DC schools and with the Civil Air Patrol cadet programs, there was a major emphasis on teaching youth aviation. Specifically for the cadet programs, students didn't necessarily learn how to fly, but they would visit airports, they would go on practice flights, things like that. This is a scan of the Maryland Airport Directory, and on the left is actually the layout of Columbia Air Center, so you can see all that information. John Green was then something that really stands out as the curator and collection manager at College Park Aviation Museum. John Green was very meticulous about the policies and procedures he kept. He standardized policies and procedures and recorded them, and he has so many records that I do not see any equivalent for in the archives on College Park Airport. So such as this: notices, traffic patterns, release cards, taxi patterns. I've never seen anything like this for the collections for College Park Airport. So it's amazing that he kept this, he made this and kept this. Because he was self-taught for this. He was an aviation mechanic, and yeah. But in 1954, he retires and officially closes the company of the Columbia Air Center. His wife dies in that same period, and he had been interested in returning to Hampton Institute to finish his degree. So it's probably, we believe, sparked by the death of his wife. He officially does that. He retires and returns to Hampton Institute. From 1954 to 1962, the airport's roughly known as Columbia Airport. It's first operated by Herbert H. Jones Jr. and Charles Wren. They assume operation under the name of W&J Flying Services. Joan leaves possibly due to having gotten a private commercial pilot job flying for an East Coast fishing company. Charles Wren, who was also a veteran and in the Civil Air Patrol, partners with other members of the former Columbia Air Center, and they continue operation under the name of Capital Flying Club. And most people have recorded that the airport actually closed at 1956, but because we found agreements and leases that continued to 1962 that was not the case. So what I believe is that the 1956 closing date is actually the closing date of W&J Flying Services. And they continue as both being a flight school, flight area, as well as a social space. Here, there's a lease for the skydiving club. They also have a motorcycle race club. But in 1956, the attendance does start to severely dwindle. We don't have specific numbers, but from interviews and from other material, it seems that there are a few main reasons. One, Green himself was a major attraction. Once he left, people decided going to closer airports, which is made possible because airports were slowly desegregating at this time. Airport owners preferred money over prejudice. airport owners in Los Angeles and Chicago were already aware of this. It's very expensive to run an airport. You have a pretty small population of pilots that you could even choose from. So it seemed in the 1950s, airports in the area would start desegregating. And because Columbia Air Center is so far, some pilots start deciding to fly at closer airports. We believe Coleridge M. Gill did this, that once Green left, he was no longer interested in flying so far away. We don't have specific airports that they would have moved to, but we believe a lot of them went to Hyde/Executive Field. Another main reason for the dwindling attendance was the expiration of the GI Bill in 1956. The GI Bill helped veterans pay for schooling. While this was unequally enforced, a lot of white businesses wouldn't take the GI Bill from Black veterans. Columbia Air Center, of course, did take the money from Black veterans. So once that expired, we had less pilots who were able to attend. And a lot of the pilots who flew out of Columbia Air Center were federal employees, which helped fund their interests. But I mean, as we all know, federal employees don't necessarily make enough to be able to be flying that much on their own, especially so far away. So the airport officially closes in 1962. I haven't been able to find a specific date of death for Rebecca Fisher, but she died sometime, I believe, in the early 1960s, and her heirs will not lease to African Americans. So instead, they sell the land to MNC PPC, and then it becomes part of the Patuxent River Park. To go over the legacy of the Columbia Air Center, was a shining example of Black excellence, and it was born out of the unique circumstances of the DC area. There was an established Black community, including a business class and an elite. Federal jobs provided a lot of its members of funding and stability to be pilots. And it was unique because airports weren't from the beginning willing to let Black pilots fly at segregated airports like they were in Los Angeles and Chicago, but it wasn't necessarily as restrictive of racism as in the South, which completely refused to let Black pilots to fly. So this is a unique set of circumstances in the DC area. And then there was a major focus on education. So from Hanson in the very beginning with his Junior Colored Air Legion of the YMCA, to Anderson trying to open up an air school, to Green focusing on educating fellow adults as well as youth, defined each iteration of African-American aviation at this time. And that is best embodied by the Civil Air Patrol Cadet Program. One of the pilots who learned how to fly there, not through the program, but just as an adult, was Fred Pitcher, who would become one of the first Black commercial pilots, later flying for Western Airlines, which became part of Delta. Anderson, if you recognize his name, he was father of the Tuskegee Airmen, but before the Tuskegee Airmen, he was a father of the Cloud Club, and therefore of Columbia Air Center. John Pinkett, as a Cloud Club member and student Anderson, will become instructor at for the Tuskegee Airmen. And this is maybe not the strongest link, but in the very first class of the Howard University Civilian Pilot Training Program, there was a student named Yancey Williams who was taught by Anderson and flew out of Hybel Valley. And once the war breaks out, he applies to join the U.S. Air Force. But this was before at the time, there was no Black Air Force for him to join. So he was denied. And the reason it was said is race. And he works with the NAACP. Thurgood Marshall is a lawyer who gives advice for him and his counsel, and he files a lawsuit saying under separate but equal, you either have to admit me into the white Air Force because there is no other Black Air Force, or you have to create a Black Air Force for me to fly in. And then the next day they announced that they will be making separate Black units. A lot of historians say, well, they were going to do that anyway, but the link is still there, however meaningful that is. And Herbert H. Jones, he was too young to be a member of the Howard University Civilian Pilot Training Program. He was 16, and then with the start of World War II, that airport closes, so that program ends. He ends up moving to Chicago briefly to learn how to fly. He will become to learn how to fly at Tuskegee. He doesn't complete his training during the war, but after the war, he returns to Tuskegee to complete his training. he, as you know, becomes a co-owner of Columbia Air Center after John Green. And in the 70s, he remains in the area. He will find a group of partners and establish the International Air Association, which was the first Black-owned charter airline. They flew out of National Airport as well as BWI, and this was in operation for about 7 years. It was like a club. You would pay a membership, and once or twice a year, all the members would vote together on where they wanted to fly. Sometimes they would have special charter airlines. So, for example, they had a group of Black lawyers in the D.C. area, New York area. They would fly them to like a conference in Houston, and they would get a discount rate for that. And this is just a list of names. So I've mentioned a few names. These are the names that we know, but these are the names we have information about. But I have over 100 names associated with the airport through the research. So these are names I've gathered from just the documents themselves. There have been some rosters from newspapers. There is such a rich history here, but we only have connection to about 6 families and 6 individuals. That's something that we hope to be changing with the opening of this exhibit. And to talk about preserving this history, it closes in 1962, but I am not from the area. I had never heard of this airport until I started working here, and I believe that's not a unique case. This is an overlooked history, but many members of the Columbia Air Center as well as the community preserved their own history. John Green and Herbert Jones kept scrapbooks of their material that they meticulously preserved and passed on. The Jones family would give lectures to keep this memory alive. Many of these members who were part of the Columbia Air Center would become involved in the area's Black aviation, who would remain involved in the area's Black aviation community, most notably through the Negro Airmen International, which named their DC chapter after John Green, and the Black Pilots of America. Herb Jones continued teaching aviation into his 70s, possibly his 80s. I believe he was born in 1920, and he opened up a flight school in the late 1980 with his wife. There were also grassroots historians who weren't at Columbia Air Center who helped preserve this history. This happened along the 1980s. One such example is Dr. Patricia Sluby, who was a genealogist and worked at the patent office, where she met Herb Jones, who worked at the patent office, and she helped present and gather a lot of this history. And we actually have a great, significant collection from her. And then also in the 1980s, the Prince George's County Parks and Recreation's Black History Project, they interviewed John Green, and they started preserving some of his material, but the Black History Project at the time was just one person, and they didn't have their own site. So the items they collected, they gave it to us, the museum, as the county's aviation museum. Throughout the history of College Park Airport, families and groups would give talks at College Park Airport, being a local airport. So we have records, events of the Negro Airmen International, Black Pilots of America, Herb Jones giving talks at the airport as late as the 1980s. As of today, the East Coast chapter, the Tuskegee Airmen, still meet at College Park Airport to this day. And then on our end, as the museum, our collection, we started getting more of a collection in 2017 through 2021, and that was kind of the basis of our exhibit today. And that exhibit is Columbia Air Center Determined to Fly. Scheduled to open this fall of 2025, it really began with me inventorying the collections that I had mentioned that were donated in 2017 to 2021. For example, the Jones loan alone was 600 items. I believe Dr. Sluby's was another 500 to 600 items. So we had a bunch of items that had not yet been inventoried when I joined on. So I inventoried and kind of just gathered and organized this history, which became the basis for this exhibit. Research and writing began in 2022, and the design began in 2023, and which was just finalized at the end of last year. And as Nadine mentioned, we are currently in the fabrication phase and interactive development phase. So this is what the space used to look like before. There was a small exhibit on Columbia Air Center. It's these photographs which had minimal interpretation. And then in the center here is a gas pump. It's the only large physical remain of the airport. And it was brought to the museum for conservation I believe in 2000, 2003. And then this is one of the renders of what the space will look like now. There is on the left and the right, there's traditional panels, but in the center, there will be interactive holograms that people can ask, and this will be a projected screen with a montage of video images to set the mood and kind of give some context. The exhibit design is meant to be engaging. It's designed by a firm called Time Looper, which specializes in engaging and immersive exhibition design. So it's traditional elements mixed with new digital elements, such as 4 holograms. We will hopefully have funding to complete an interactive game, which is kind of a choose your own adventure where you assume the identity of a black pilot in 1920s or 1930s, and you get different options on how to earn a license. So like, do you apply for flying school or do you try to apply it for yourself? Hopefully we'll get the funding for that. And then, as I mentioned, there's a projected video. This is meant to engage audiences of all ages, especially youth audiences. And the goals of the exhibit is to give a permanent space to share this history, but it's also to begin a new phase of research and collecting. As I said, all this history we have is from 4 to 6 families and individuals, their collections, and then their memories. We've only had contact with one living person of Columbia Air Center, and he was one of the Civil Air Patrol cadets. But, you know, he was 16 years old in the 50s, so even his knowledge goes so far. We're really hoping to reach out to descendants of families who we knew helped preserve this history in the 80s and 90s, but who we do not have contact with. We also have not been able, we also hope to start a news phase, partnerships with other scholars, organizations, universities, such as Howard University, UMD, to get their expertise on further growing this history in this collection. And of course, to help make this possible, us and our foundation are working on our fundraising campaign. So our nonprofit foundation is called the Feel the First Foundation, and we are currently short around $125,000, and we're hoping with this exhibit fundraising campaign to help to completely close that. We're just finished finalizing our sponsorship package, which us and the foundation hope to be sending out to businesses in the areas. And we are planning a fundraising exhibition preview for Saturday, May 3rd, 2025. And some of our current sponsors include the Jones family, as well as the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority of the Maryland Historical Trust, as well as the Feel the First Foundation. And this is our save the date for the fundraiser. It's from 2 to 4. By May, we hope to have the exhibit will be fabricated. So this is just a sneak preview at that. The digital elements may not all be completed, but we hope to showcase what is completed. And it's just a night of an afternoon event with some remarks, as well as a great opportunity. And that's it on my end. I've been talking for quite a while. Please, I guess this is the time to move on to questions.
I think we can move on to questions. I don't see any in the chat yet. So I have a question about licensing. How did pilots get black pilots get licensed during that time? And was there a lot of discrimination and prohibition? Do you know?
Yes,
I mean,
there would have been a lot of discrimination because you would have had to pass a written exam as well as I don't know the term, an actual flight exam. So the best example we have is with Charles Anderson. His friend, the Flying Dutchman, had to go with him to Philadelphia to the it wasn't called the FAA back then; it's called the CAA, I believe. They had to go to that office, and he had to be there. He had to basically convince the instructor to allow him to take the written exam and the flying exam. And even at the end of it, the instructor told the Flying Dutchman that he aced this test, but because he's a black man, I'll give him a passing grade at like 75%, because we can't have him passing that grade. That was in 1932. I don't quite know how that changed in 1944, but John Green seemed to have a real good relationship with the Maryland State Aviation Commission. And through the civilian pilot training program, becoming a member of that program earned you a license.
Okay. That's great. Carter, I'm not seeing, oh, Mady. Was that Mady? Or is that,
Betty.
oh, wait, it looks like Betty has a
Betty.
question.
Yeah.
Hand up first.
Yeah, I get two questions. One, in your picture of all the Cloud Club, at first I thought there was a woman in the front row. Now, later I saw, I guess, him, and that told me, no, that's not a woman in the front row. Am I correct?
Correct. In this photo right here?
Yeah, the person without the hat, originally, when you flip through it, I thought that, but I saw him later. So I'm just verifying that that is a man.
Yeah, that is a man. I don't know if we know his name. I believe some of these might be band members of Jimmy Lunceford.
Gotcha.
This is mostly members of the board of the Cloud Club like leadership, but there were a few women. So John Pinkin, which I believe is the person in the top left with the hat, his younger sister was actually the first one of the first female members of the Howard University civilian pilot training program. They did have a number of women. We don't have a lot of information. For example, this is a snippet from the air show. I believe both of those women did fly. Betty Wallace and Connie Lucas. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information about them. In the Cloud Club, especially, which is pre-World War, we have almost no information on most of the individuals. In our collection, in the exhibit itself, we will have one focus on Gladys Odie. Gladys Odie was from Missouri. Her sister had moved to the DC area after the war to get a federal job. She was connected at the hip with her sister, so she decided to move to DC to join her. While on a streetcar, she saw an advertisement. Do you want to learn how to fly? She's like, sure. She called up and she learned how to fly. And we actually, we have connected with her descendants. We have a recorded history of her from around 2013, and we have a bit more of information on her. We do know that there were a number of female pilots, but we have not been able to connect with their descendants, so we know very little about most of them.
Wow. And my second is you have a picture that has three people in it. I think one is green, and you were talking about the school was integrated. And I wasn't sure if that picture of green and two there you go.
Oh, yes.
If you were using that picture to illustrate that it was integrated. Because if you were, I'm not sure about that middle guy.
Fair enough. Good point. I don't know how it worked with school-wise actually, because I don't believe the schools themselves were. I mean, the schools themselves were segregated, but it seems the aeronautics program went across multiple schools. This also might be through the civilian pilot training, the Civil Air Patrol. It's unclear because these are just a collection from a gentleman named Robert McNeil, who was a big newspaper photographer. And unfortunately, there are no notes with it. There's just a bunch of these pictures, a group of these pictures with these same three young men around an airplane. But there are reports that saying about half the Civil Air Patrol cadet students in like 1952 were white.
Gotcha. And again, for me, of course, I'm just hoping, or if that picture was supposed to support that, you see,
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure it does.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Oh, and we did know that one of the three instructors, at least during the River State Airfield phase, was white. We unfortunately don't have any photos of any of the instructors.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
I'm going to come to David Siegel, but Adrian was on here and had her hand up, and I want to make sure that we don't miss her. But why don't you go ahead, David, and I'll ask Adrian to come forward again.
Thank you. This is very interesting stuff. One of the things that you indicated during the course of the presentation is that there was some contact between CAC and the Tuskegee Airmen, which was the major training center for Black aviators in the Army Signal Corps. There was not yet an Army Air Force. And I'm wondering, the Tuskegee Airmen alumni have a phenomenally large archive. And you mentioned that their local chapter, in fact, meets in College Park. And I wonder if using that resource going into their archive, you might work back to linkages between them and Columbia.
Yeah, I would definitely love to. Honestly, the opening of this exhibit has been a big focus of my energies for the last year or so, and I'm hoping once it's actually open to return to some of this research that I'd like to do.
Good.
Sure. Are there other questions?
Yeah, this is Adrian. I wanted to, I had a question about women because I didn't see any pictures of women, but in that list of individuals that or participants, I saw women's names, so that confirmed it. But the other thing in terms of sponsorship and fundraising, have you connected with whatever part of Maryland government where you can get tax credits? So like Joe's Movement Emporium in Mount Rainier, I'm on the board. When people donate 50%, if you give, I think it's a minimum of $100, but if you donate $100, 50 of that you get as a tax credit. So I'm just offering that as possibly, that's always a great incentive for people making charitable contributions to get a tax credit.
Thank you for letting me know. I don't believe we have looked into that.
How do we make a donation?
So as of right now, our donations are through our, not, as always, our foundation, the Field of First Foundation. If you visit their website, fieldoffirst.com, there's a donate to the exhibit button. Yeah.
Or if you click on the link here, I mean, if you click on the, I'm not sure what it's called, but it takes you directly to a donation page.
And if you want, you can just Google Field of Firsts.
Why don't you put it in the chat so people can click on it immediately?
Great
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, we could do that.
Is
There
there
it is.
an active, I'm just wondering, active associations of Black pilots, because they certainly would support this sort of event that celebrates their history. And does Chicago, you mentioned Chicago and LA had the bigger schools, are they still around, and would they want to could you reach out to them and perhaps they want to participate, support, promote it so that
Yeah, no, that we're really once we finish the actual design of the sponsorship package, I think we're going to be reaching out to a lot of our partners. As I mentioned, we are partnered with the East Coast chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, and I think we'd be definitely relying on their advice for the air school, flight schools. None of the ones that were open in the 30s and 40s remain in operation, but we know that the East Coast chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, there's a Tuskegee Airmen conference every August. We really hope to utilize that conference, maybe have some ads in their material there. Yeah.
Great. I see David and Betty, your hands are still up. Or you? Okay.
No, I'm back again with another question.
Okay, I'm going to go to David
You go first, Betty.
Oh, okay. Betty, go
Okay.
first.
And I wondered how connected you are to the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Not at all yet. No.
Yeah, but you clearly will do that, right?
Yes.
That's it.
We're Smithsonian affiliates, So we're connected to them, to the
Yeah.
Smithsonian through the affiliation, and we're sharing with them the information, and we promote it through their channels.
Very good.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Air and Space Museum as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a lot of connections, direct
With them.
connections with Air and Space Museum.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and what does Anacostia collect anything or regarding
they-
aviation?
I haven't been able to find anything online for aviation, but I have not been able to reach out to anyone personally to ask.
Yeah, okay.
The other
So,
It's okay.
wait, I want to go to
Yeah.
David and then to Mr. or Miss Williams.
Well, another idea for a resource. Right after World War II, the Air Force emerged as an independent service from the Army Air Corps. It was not segregated. And the University of Maryland established the first and probably at the time the biggest Air Force ROTC unit in the country, in part because of the location of the university and the College Park Airport. I wonder if that Air Force ROTC unit might have some information tying back to the material you're working with.
That's a great idea. We hadn't thought about that. I had originally tried reaching out to historians of the Civil Air Patrol, and I used to work with one of the lead historians who works at the National Museum of American History. But apparently, each base was responsible for its own archives, and the DC area base basically kept no records. But ROTC is a fantastic avenue I have not thought of. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Judy. It's Judy Williams, right?
Yes, I'm here. Almost forgot my question. First of all, I want to say thank you for this webinar or this Zoom. I learned a lot today, so I appreciate the conversation. My second question, and I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, I wanted to follow the trail with the land that they eventually settled on. I know the lady sold it. They were renting initially, the Cloud Club. And I wanted to, could he say the name of the person? And I wasn't sure if they were African Americans or they were just Caucasians. I don't know. And I wanted to know about the land.
Yeah. So the land was owned by a white woman named Rebecca Fisher. I wish I put it in here. There's a great photo with her and John Green. I believe somewhere in this document, which is not, the rest of the documents are not here, but somewhere in this document there is a bit of history of the title of the land. This document was made by the U.S. Navy, so it's in the 1940s. She was still alive at the time, but I believe it is in trust from her husband, so she was not able to sell the land. So she rented it out. I don't know how the Cloud Club got in contact with her, but they seem to have had good relationships. Then she died in the 1960s, and her heirs refused to continue leasing to African Americans. I think, let me see if we have. No, I don't think
Initially, I thought she was the woman who was sitting beside the pilot, but that wasn't her.
No.
No, she was older than John Green.
Okay.
But I have not been able to find a lot of information or any information yet about her.
Okay. All right. That's the question I had, and if I have any more, I'll think about it and I'll raise my hand again. Thank you so much for the information.
Of course.
Adrian, Charles, you have a question? I think you had one before too.
Yeah. I wanted to let you know that there is an African American genealogy society based in Washington, D.C., which may be a resource. And also that Maryland is the only state that has a federal, state, and county Black museum. So there's also the State Museum in Baltimore. And there was one, the PG one, right here on Route 1.
In North Brentwood.
Yeah, I don't know if they're still open and active. So it may no longer be, and I don't know what resources they may have. But also, I wanted to mention the fact that there are Black sorority, Greek letter
Mhm.
associations, sororities and fraternities that keep these sort of documents and records as a resource. And while I'm a native New Yorker, I do have some friends here who are native Washingtonians. And I will ask their parents, to take a look because they may recognize some names, because I'm always amazed when I'm hanging out with natives from DC and they, Black folks, and they're like, oh, what high school did you go to? And they just, the connections are made, everything falls into place. Not like that in New York City. But so I will, share this information out and check. I have cousins. They're twins, and they were both pilots for United.
Wow.
And I will ask them and see what because they probably have friends and connections, but just to think about all the
Great.
different associations. There are Black mayors. There's a Black mayor. There's association.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is really helpful, and please, yeah, if you hear more from your friends, I'd love that. Yeah, the frustrating-ish thing was that in the 90s and early 2000s, we have a bit of correspondence with the Herb Jones family, with other descendants or surviving members of the Cloud Club, trying to because they were trying to get it registered as a historical landmark at the time. I don't think that was successful, but their addresses and phone numbers seem to all have changed from that period, and it was not that long ago. But who knows if where these people are now, or if they're still alive. But I believe that a lot of these descendants are still in the area, and I'm really hoping for, yeah, with everyone's recommendations, that we can get enough publicity and word out there with this exhibit to continue growing this history.
Luke, could you please put your email in the chat
Yes.
so people can connect with you if they have resources or contact? That would be very helpful. Thank you.
That's great. I think we're coming to a close here. I see Betty's got her hand up again.
Here I
Yeah.
am again.
Okay.
Just following up with what I believe that was Adrian just then said,
Right.
and moving it over. Don't know if you have their Vitas, or you say family members and all that. It just triggering if any of them are fraternity members. She had said sorority, which is okay, but fraternity members,
She said both.
they will have, or they could have, some related information.
Yeah, I
Great.
think I said both.
She did
Oh,
said both.
yeah.
Said both.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah. That's great.
I think we're coming to a close here. I don't see any more questions, but I do know, I really want to thank both speakers for this really wonderful information, and I think folks will follow up. We've got a few announcements to make. I think, let's see, I know that the Senior Art Show in College Park is on the 28th of February. And I don't know if
28th of March, Lisa.
Oh, it's 28th of March. That's a good thing. Thank you. Is there anything else we should know about that time or whatever, Marianne?
4 o'clock to 7, and coincidentally, it will be at the College Park Airport Museum.
Well, there you go.
But that's in the administration building to the left
Okay.
of the main.
But also, we are still accepting entries. So if there are senior artists in the area who would like to participate and have their works there, it's still possible to do so.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. Also, the next quarter conversation is on the 22nd of March with on Pyramid Atlantic, which is the printing and art program in Hyattsville. And I know that Rosanna.
There's an event today on Black artists at Pyramid
Oh, cool. That's right.
from 12 to 6.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. Thank you very much. And Rosanna Weaver has a number of announcements.
Yeah, just a few things that HAP is working on that are coming up. On Sunday, March 16th, there's going to be an intergenerational afternoon of playing board games. That's going to be held at Maryland Meadworks from about 4:30 to 6:30. And we're thinking about how, one of the things I'm thinking about is how we can get people to existing events. So if transportation is something that is stopping people from attending, circle back with us about that. And then on Wednesday, March 19th, speaking of the same sort of thing, there's a great event at the library. It alternates between Bladensburg and Hyattsville. This past week, we had Coffee and Classics at Hyattsville Library, and about, I would say, a quarter of the crowd were HAP people, or were people who were there because of our HAP announcement. The next Coffee and Classics is Wednesday, March 19th. And it will be at Bladensburg, but we can provide transport to some. And the movie on the 19th is Wait Until Dark. It's a thriller starring Audrey Hepburn and Alan Arkin. And it's just nice. There are about 20 people that, come watch the movies and have coffee, and they have cookies out and stuff.
Rosanna, I just wanted to sort of add to that because I'm glad you mentioned the library.
Yeah.
A couple of months ago, we had Heather Johnson from the library do a corridor conversations. And as a follow-up to that, she is doing a tour of the library for anyone that wants to attend. That's also March 28th, but that's in the morning. And I would encourage you, if you have not been to the library, it's not just books. There's a lot going on over there. And I think that you would find it fun. And then the other thing is we're trying a game day as well. Maybe we can coordinate these. We're doing one this coming Thursday at Game Castle in College Park. That's in the shopping center, and it's right next to Starbucks. So I think our goal for all of this is to get people out, to get people to meet each other, and to provide activities that they might not previously have thought of. So if Rosanna and I have not filled up your calendars, let us know.
And Marianne, I'm going to follow up with you to get more information on that stuff.
Okay, great.
Is there a central calendar for these events, or do I get it, Carter, do I get it from you? Because I get your events.
Adrian, we're working on that at the moment. I don't think there is. You have to go individually to the Hyattsville website and the College Park City website, and but
an awful lot is put out on the Hope listserv, which is Hyattsville, but it's there are people from all over the area.
Oh, and actually, while we're mentioning other people's, and Hyattsville, the city also has an event coming up this week. I don't know if it's full yet or not, but they're taking a bus of people to go see the National Great Blacks in Wax Museum in Baltimore, and you can contact them about. You can easily find it on their webpage, the information about how to get
they also, the city on that Friday is having an intergenerational trip to the African American Museum.
Right.
So while you're checking, check that too.
And Joe's Movement Emporium in right in Mount Rainier is having they actually had a play created called Out in the Vineyard, and it's about place and enslaved people who had lawsuits for their freedom, and so it's currently at the school, the Proscenium at PGCC, and there I think I'm not sure how long it is, but it's definitely this weekend.
Oh, wow.
And the goal was to have all the school kids, a bunch of school kids know they've been doing fundraising to take kids to the theater so that they have this information, this history that most of us are completely unaware of.
Right.
Wow.
And I would just say those things were all announced on the Hope listserv. So an awful lot of the events end up on the Hope listserv. Okay.
And swag, are you guys gonna have like I do have sweatshirts, but I love the zip ups. Are you gonna have any t-shirts or anything so we can build a buzz about this fabulous event coming up?
You're talking about the museum or the museum exhibit,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
We haven't thought about it, but something to consider. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for the suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, and even cards, because I'm near Glut, which you may or may not know is the oldest food co-op in the area. I think it's 45 years old, and so a lot of people come there, and there's a bulletin board, busboys and poets, just
Sure.
get buzz.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Anything else? Rosanna Carter. No. Well, Bonnie and Marianne, thank you very much. And Robert, thank you this was originally Robert's idea. And he's recovering from a hip operation, so he's not presenting today, but we want to thank him for bringing this idea to us. Thanks.
Robert.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mhm.
Bye.